Hey. Hello, my dear. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey. First of all, apologies for the other morning.
Give my video a moment. There we are. Hi.
Can you hear me okay?
I can. It's not really loud.
Okay, hold on. The default microphone has changed to Yeti, and now it is. Okay, good. Can you hear me though?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
I really wish it would give me a voice like Avi from Pentatonics. Do you know Pentatonics?
I don't. But
They're delightful. I cried the first time I saw them. They're 5 kids, 20s maybe, who sing a cappella. And I saw them singing something called Little Drummer Boy. You know, Little Drummer Boy, a few years ago online. And oh, it's recording. Shit. Wait, hang on.
Hey, Kamala. Devi.
Hey, Adam.
How you doing, first of all?
Great. It's it's almost Mother's Day, so I'm loving the divine feminine.
But who doesn't, after all? I guess I call you Kamala. You were known as Kamala on the TV show Polyamory, Married and Dating.
Yes.
I think the outer world mostly knows you. What was that like? What was that like? Like, how did that affect? It was, for those who don't know, it was a Showtime, lasted 2 seasons, right?
Yep.
And they followed, well, I'll let you explain, but they followed polyamorous pod families. Mm-hmm. And what was that like for you?
Well, it was really like the deepest personal growth journey I've ever done. It was very, in a sense, it's like, okay, I'm on my mission. I'm getting to share about love to the broadest possible audience. And with cameras in your face, of course, that brings up ego. So I've got like my soul's purpose on one hand, and then I've got like the biggest ego confronting exercise on the other. And it was just sort of surfing into authentic expressing and not hiding from, the nitty gritty of what it means to be a pioneer and try a different love style in a mainstream cult, which peddles monogamy.
I love that. Wow, a mainstream cult that peddles monogamy. It's a long-lasting cult.
Yeah.
I'm hiking buddies with Chris Ryan, who I'm sure you know.
Yep.
Up here in Topanga, who wrote Sex at Dawn, and he'll be here one day on this podcast. Most people probably don't know his work, but his work, Sex at Dawn, shows that monogamy is an anomaly historically. And without judging good, bad, it's just like it tends to be an anomaly. And there's lots of biological and anthropological research which shows why not why it's true, that it is true. So you call it a cult. I've never heard monogamy called a cult.
It's funny. It's not technically a cult. There's no charismatic leader. There's not like but you do get punished when you leave it. Yeah. Like a cult. It's like you're in it and then all of a sudden you're like, this isn't for me. And then there's a whole lot of like social pressure, and there's not much protection from both, the law and there's a lot of punishment for leaving that ideology. But, for the record, I'm a huge fan of people who are doing conscious monogamy. Mm-hmm. I know you and I had a little talk about what to name this segment. And in the brainstorm, fuck monogamy was one of the possibilities. And I was like, no, don't say that. Because monogamy, when not by default,
right,
can be a beautiful soul commitment and container for people to grow. It's just not the only container.
No, it's not the only container. Certainly not historically either. You used the term I wanted to, conscious monogamy, you said. So most people do it as just a default. And you said you get punished when you leave the cult. But were you referring to women more? Because I think men are often celebrated for leaving that cult.
That's an interesting point. I don't actually see this as a gender issue at all. There's pros and cons, but certainly a man being more promiscuous is celebrated. However, it really is, it's kind of a complex, nuanced lifestyle. And the women in polyamory and and typically like it's more of a matriarchal kind of organization. So the women have more choice and more empowered and more like, so I don't see it as men getting a better deal in polyamory at all.
Got you. Okay. Let's define for polyamory may not be clear to people. So I think people might be surprised. Oh, polyamory is empowering of women. First of all, let's just say that you're one of the leading voices on explaining to the whole fucking world what polyamory is. Why don't you take a moment and just clarify for folks?
Happy to, because in general, people know what monogamy is. That's the standard narrative. And then there's a lot of people who are like, well, we're monogamish and starting to open into open marriages. And sometimes that's like, oh, it's a hall pass. You're going on a vacation. You can have this little play or fun. And sometimes it's swinging. And then there's, don't ask, don't tell. Well, what polyamory is, because there's lots of different non-monogamy models, some of them very ethical, others questionable. But polyamory is this explicit arrangement in which you can be loving and sexual with more than one person with the informed consent of all involved. So that's the key, is that it's really about everybody knowing and consenting. And, one of the things I think Huffington Post just interviewed me and they're like, what's the most annoying thing that you get asked? And I'm like, it's so annoying when people say, isn't that cheating? And it's like, no, it's the opposite, because cheating's sneaking and lying, and polyamory is open and considering everyone's feelings.
Right. It's funny. It reminds me of at the Passover Seder, there's 4 children who ask questions and one's the innocent child.
Why on this night?
Why on this night? Like, what does this mean? Like, the kid who just can't even understand. I think for a lot of people who are in the cult, we'll call it a cult. There's people who are in the mainstream, in the norm of monogamy, that's the only thing they know. That, oh, it's either cheating or it's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of like an innocent question in some ways.
It is. And I do love that people are questioning, because I think the monogamous paradigm, and this is the lie, or this is the part I can't stand behind, which is that once you find your one and only, then you'll never be attracted to anyone ever again.
I didn't have to do that, by the way. I once wrote an article for Reality Sandwich, which is part of the Evolver movement.
Right, I'm aware.
Yeah, called The Soulmate Con. Now, it's a con. I mean, it's a reduction to think that there's only one person wandering around this world who you'd make a great partner with. It's kind of I think I wrote that it's kind of an insult to our own hearts, because if our hearts are open and our minds are conscious and aware, you can love a lot of different, like really deeply love a whole lot of different people. But what do you think? What do you think this con comes from? This twin flame? We're twin flames. We found each other. Where does that come from?
Well, it's a two-part thing. Like if you're asking historically, sociopolitically, it's very, very clear. And Christopher Ryan traces that back better than anyone else. But we can look at the fact that we have the church state, or the churches early on, who were the most powerful entities. And what they need is, in order to control people, need people to be obedient. And happy people, pleasurable people, abundant people aren't obedient. They're like saying fuck normal, right? So they need instead for people to say, oh, I will forego my sex and my sexuality only to one person. And what will happen is their sex and their pleasure will diminish so much that they'll start seeking and looking for happiness outside of themselves in some future heaven or some promise of, some church. And so it's actually sociopolitically a strategy to control the masses.
That kind of it's the controlling of the id on one hand, so that creates some order, but it's also a controlling of, the way you put it, it's almost like controlling of exuberance. And I see the world in so many different ways. One of the ways I break it up is by enneagrams, by personality types. Enneagram is a useful one for me, and it makes everything so clear that there are just different personality types. You know Enneagram probably, right?
Sure, yeah.
And you're probably a 7, I'm guessing, like me. What a surprise! So we're like pleasure seekers. We're here to enjoy, it's our natural state to want to enjoy life, to experience life. Some people aren't like that. You know, some people, their natural state is they love creating order. They love fixing things. And there's nothing wrong with any of them.
Yeah. But I sincerely doubt, you know, I think if you took a polyamorous population or even a swinger open, I sincerely doubt you would even find any correlation between personality type.
Nope.
It's very nuanced and complex. The other, you know, if we're not talking sociopolitically and we're talking personally, you know, a lot of people buy into monogamy because it's fucking easier. Like, wow, like I don't, you know, if you have one twin flame you're trying to find,
Right.
and then when you find them to actually create an agreement that like, you're not going to leave me, you're not going to, you know, not just forsake me, but I don't have to deal, like if we make this monogamous commitment, I don't have to deal with all the jealousy of you being in somebody else's arms.
Right.
And that's a promise that actually like, you know, deeply, deeply provides safety, security, nourishment, stability, ease for most people. And being polyamorous is not anywhere near the, you know, the easiest path.
No, I mean, but it's interesting. It's like extrinsic or intrinsic, you know, when you have that agreement that extrinsically, like the extrinsic sort of compulsion is you will not be in someone else's arms. But what really is important is what's going on inside intrinsically. You're full of desire and frustration. And, you know, having been in monogamous relationships, I got married very young. And it was funny. I remember way back when I was like, yeah, I was 24, way back. And we got married. And I remember the first time I sang my wife, and it sounded so strange. Like, I don't possess her. I really don't want to possess her. You know, and that whole notion of possession really, it struck me because I didn't think about much because I was in my early 20s, but, you know, I was just bumbling through life. But it felt wrong. It felt very strange.
What is wrong? I mean, the roots of, you know, husbandry are ownership, and it is wrong. It's a type of enslaved history. Like, oh, we're trading our dowry for, you know, now this is more property. And so there is a wrongness to it. But there's also something deep biological right about wanting something to yourself. So I don't want to dismiss that the way we're wired biologically is for attachment. And if you look at the language of love, the early cross-cultural language is my mom, my dad. You know, these are people we love most. These
my
are
toys, yeah.
My toys, yeah. The deepest attachments we have, though, is my best friend, you know, and it's like, because who we are, our identity is in relation to these beings. And so, you know, even like I don't possess my girlfriend. I've had a girlfriend now for 7 years, and she is my girlfriend. I do feel a certain, you know, she's a free, liberated, sovereign woman, and she's my girlfriend in relation to me.
I'm going to stop 1 second. There's a strange noise when you're talking.
Oh, you know, I wonder if it's my computer being the fan on my computer. I don't know if there's much I can do about it. Sure.
First of all, here's the break. Okay. All right. So your girlfriend, so do you get jealous?
Yes, indeed I do. I wonder, there are people in the world who don't get jealous. I wonder if I'm more attracted to this lifestyle partly to help me overcome the intensity of jealousy that I happen to feel. Like, you know, if there's a continuum, and some people are like, yeah, no, I feel free and happy for everyone else's happiness, and then over here we have the Latin, the controlling, that's my ancestors come through me. Yeah. And it's strong. And I've had a lot of, you know, I have Latin friends and lovers who are like, oh, it's not always like that. And I'm like, you know, it feels me. Like, I look at my mom and her mother and my entire matrilineal line and the machismo in my culture. And it does feel like there's certain cultures that have it stronger than others.
Possessiveness.
Yes.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a correlation. I just spent 2.5 months traveling in South America and Caribbean, and it strikes me that this time really it hit me that when there's scarcity, you're much more possessive in general. You know, and when there's total abundance, Norway, Finland, Sweden, you tend not to be, because you know that there's so much abundance around that you don't get possessive.
You know, it's interesting because I go around the world and I teach, and Sweden's one of the summer places. I spend a lot of time, in the polyamory community is booming, and people just get it. They really get it. And I have noticed that in culturally, but I don't know whether it's abundance or if it's, you know, what the values are, the deep cultural values.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's, I mean, yeah, it's interesting. I think in some ways, you know, abundance creates value. Scarcity creates, sometimes, not always, but economics does kind of shape cultures.
Absolutely. I mean, it's sort of an economic question. I used to have this joke, which is like, free love, can you really afford it, right? but there's such pros and cons to it. And, you know, in terms of really feeling like my husband has a new girlfriend, and she's younger, and she's vivacious, and like, I'm really clear that I can be super happy for him when, you know, I'm feeling taken care of, or I have someone to be with when he's on his date night. But if she is taking from my date night, right? It's like, it becomes impossible for me to be happy for someone if they're taking something from me. And so there is a certain cost, you know, in order to really do this in a highly functioning way. It's always like, hey, let's make sure that any new lovers add to you and your partner and the whole field.
How do you like, what's an example of that?
So it's a deep value system. So the philosophy is to make an agreement with everyone who's participating that you're adding, that you choose lovers that actually add to your well-being and your partnership. Mm-hmm. Because there are lovers who want to take you away, want you to themselves, you know, so it's like, if that's their mentality, it's going to be a constant struggle. We all have to feel like, oh, like if I have two couples that I'm with, like if I'm with that couple, I want to make sure that, like a Burning Man saying, right? I leave the campsite better than I found it. I want to make sure that those lovers are actually more abundant instead of, you know, taxed, and then they don't have energy for each other.
Well, do you test for that? Do you have a conversation when somebody comes into the circle, the pod, the group?
Yeah, certainly there's a partner selection vetting process, and it's not so formal as an application, but it's like in dialogue. If you're at a potluck, or if you're in, you know, you're out at a party and you meet someone, it's really kind of getting their come from.
Yeah.
And, you know, and the kind of questions you'd ask is like, you know, it's like, you know, why, you know, are you interested in seeing multiple partners? You know, what's that about? What's the value and the needs underneath? And if they're coming from ego, you know, like, oh, or if they're coming from fear of commitment, you know, there's a lot of kind of negative reasons to come from that will actually create chaos in the relationship. Then you just say, okay, cool, I'm not gonna necessarily engage. But if they're coming from a really abundant place of like, you know, I love and want to contribute and want to like, and respect your partners and want to be part of the ecology in a way that's nourishing to everyone. Like if that's the come from, then it's like, awesome. What are you doing Saturday night?
Right. It sounds like a beautiful place to come from. I'm wondering, you know, like you've been teaching a long time. I mean, you've been very vocal in the community. You've been teaching for a long time. Do you give a shit what people think anymore? Like outside people? It's
a really good question, Adam, because I care what some people think deeply. I have a circle, almost like an advisory circle, because the kind of attention that I've gotten can be dangerous. It can be like, I could get so full of myself and be misled if I didn't have some people really holding me accountable to being in integrity.
Misled in what way? What do you mean?
Well, there's a tremendous amount of power that comes with attention, that comes with, you know, like, not that I'm famous, but like,
hey, showtime.
Just teaching, right? Like if you're a teacher, people give you power. Yeah. And so it's important that when you're being in that position of power, that you're held accountable for what, you know, for what you're are you walking your talk? You know, are you truly showing up and contributing? Or is this, again, I keep mentioning the distinction between ego and essence, but it's my intention to always be, you know, coming from my soul's purpose and not about, look at me, look at me.
Ego being kind of like social self, essence being intrinsic self.
That's a good way of saying it, to simplify it.
Yeah.
But I would more say there's soul and there's personality.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Got it. I mean, one of my best definitions of personality that, you know, I've done a lot of reading on the psychological development of attachment, you know, how people strategize in the world, that our personalities are really just an aggregation of all the strategies we came up with as little kids to feel safe. And everything we think makes us amazing is just a surface strategy to try to make us feel safe, which of course is impossible. But, you know, I was just wondering, because I know we met a long time ago. Yeah. We met a long time ago at where was it? Sedona? Was it?
It was. I think you were doing work with Moses Ma at the time, and
yes, we were. Yes,
and yeah, it was.
Yeah, good old Moses. Yeah, we were trying to create a community of tantra teachers, which I think he eventually referred to as trying to herd cats, to create sort of an online world where people could really learn about, you know, more enlightened sexuality. You know, and so that's 10, 11 years ago. So the question I'm like thinking is like, you know, you've been doing this a long time, you know yourself really well. And, you know, when I said you give a shit what people care, like, does it hurt? Do you still get hurt by sort of people when they find out, you know, what you're up to and how you live and what your values are, and they're mean? Do you take it out?
So, yeah, people can be really mean. And I had like a defining moment because, you know, in the beginning, like when I was on the Tyra Banks show, I'd get hate mail. And the biggest thing as a new mom is if someone attacked my parenting and they're like, your child's going to have psychological damage. And I'd be like, oh no, you know. And the defining moment was, I believe it was after the first season of the reality show, I had gotten it was a hate campaign online, like Kamala Devi is a skinnybitch.com. And
I'm glad you can laugh.
I can laugh now, but
it's better than being a fat bitch, I guess. I mean, we're in California, so.
So I was really taken under by it, and I was talking with Charles Muir, who's one of my mentors. And he just said, you know, what is it? What is the content of this that's hurting you? And it was this religious guy who really felt like my child is going to burn in hell, you know, and he's like being mean. And Charles is like, he's like, can't you see that this is a prayer request, that this sincere lost soul is asking for your prayers? Like they're hurting that bad, that seeing you in the world fills them with so much wrath that they have to lash out. Like, this is a really lost soul. And I was like, wow, yeah, they have that much, like, you know, angst and rage that they have to, I'm like, wow. And I recognize like how much love, how much, you know, beauty I have in my life and how threatening that is.
Threatening is the word I was looking for. Yeah.
And I was like, so I just wanted to, like, my heart opened and I'd get a letter like that and I'd be like, this poor person, like they really deserve my prayers. And, you know, I want for them, maybe something in my message somehow will open the door to possibility. Not now, maybe they're lost, but for other people to say, oh, wow, I can have that much pleasure. I can be myself, you know? So, you know, it's I guess it sort of fuels me to keep on my message, to keep sending out more love and light.
It's the only way. It's almost like going back. You know, my girlfriend tells a story. She's a very interesting person. When she was young, she could just see the goodness of people. She kind of, you know, not religious. She saw God everywhere. And then she was put into this kind of religious, horrible community where God was a horrible thing and didn't make sense to her. And she told me this story when she was young, and she grew up in the third world and where there's kind of low consciousness around sexuality, particularly. And she was like maybe 10 or 11, and some guy catcalled her, you know, from sitting in front of the little bodega. And she said, she turned to him and she said, what happened to you? Like, why are you like this? You know, it's like, it didn't make sense to her that someone would just be, you know, so angry and rude, because she saw everyone was actually love and light underneath. Like, she understood that as a little child, which is, I think most kids do. Mm-hmm. And so when we tell these stories, about people who are threatened. People don't know you. They don't know your kid, but somehow you're threatened. Probably from what state were they from?
Well,
some other state. You're threatening them across state lines. You're very powerful, you know that.
Yeah. It's interesting because somebody from another state called Child Protective Services kid at one point recently. And that was a devastating, another personal growth journey. But the beauty of it was, when CPS interviewed my son, she said, on no uncertain terms, that's the most well-adjusted kid I've ever met. I was like, oh, I feel very validated.
We brought him up with honesty and love and authenticity and open-heartedness. What could possibly go right? It's terrible. I mean, because, there's the issue of like being spiritual and sort of seeing people who, have a huge stick up their ass, which actually is not always a bad thing, but who just get threatened by someone else's life from so far away. And, being spiritually open and going, okay, this is a damaged person. You were saying lost soul. I would definitely say, threatened and insecure and angry and probably super repressed and wants to be polyamorous, as these things usually go, kind of obviously. But, once it crosses into...
Very true. It's like internalized homophobia.
Exactly what I'm thinking.
Most likely someone who's cheating on their wife.
Right.
They're cheating. How dare you, but out in the open? Because I literally have, a girlfriend of 7 years. I've got... My husband and I share about a dozen lovers who all know each other and have all been, like, in close community for about a decade. Mm-hmm. And it's like... It's really family. And it's deep, long-term... beautiful vision of raising our child who has really extra adult attention, and
nice.
Developmentally appropriate around
tribal.
Yeah, it's like sexual energy isn't, it's not appropriate for where he's at unless he asks, and then we tell him the truth. And so it feels really good. It feels like we have a healthy model. And it also feels, now that I'm traveling so much and I go to lots of different communities, is really flourishing these alternative communities for non-monogamy.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's almost like going back to what, Christopher Ryan describes in Sex at Dawn as, tribes raised villages. And it really, again, hit me really weird because we moved out here, the mother of my kids, we moved out to go to grad school up in the Bay Area and from the East Coast when we were young. And then we had a child. We had 2 children. All our family was either in another country or on the East Coast. We had nobody. Mm-hmm. And we did it all ourselves. And it's an incredible stress to try to be, everything to each other and to your child. It's not normal in human history. I mean, nowhere in human history except now was it expected that there's 2 people raising a kid. Yeah. So you're giving a lot of that kind of tribal support to your child, which is a great thing. I mean, it's a great thing. Mm-hmm. Wow. Child services. That must, I'm a guy. I just want to go kill someone. Like that's my initial, like, how fucking dare you, intrude on my life like this from wherever he was. I don't want to insult any particular states.
Well, these are changing times, and I expect that it won't be long before people will understand. In fact, somebody in the CPS office had seen my show and understood that we were like a unique case, and put a note in our file and said, hey, this family, if there's any other hate mail that comes, it's because of their visibility. But, it's not like I have to ongoingly worry about getting reported now.
Wow. Yeah. That's crazy. What happens when you, walk me through, because I'm really fascinated by this, because jealousy is a strange thing, Jealousy is kind of the opposite of love in some ways. When you love someone, generally you want what makes them happy. Right? That's kind of what love is.
Yeah, for them. Yes.
Yeah, right. Being inspired for their life is how I often put it. Like, good, to my humble opinion, good parenting is you work with your kid, expose them to stuff, see what turns them on in life, and move them toward their destiny that they should be having, instead of insisting they go to law school or become an engineer, right? And make them feel awful for wanting to have a passion. And we explore a lot of those issues in a lot of our other podcast, because we're all about like living your true life. It's not like if your true life is monogamous, fantastic. If it's polyamorous, fantastic. If it's swinging, fantastic. It's true to you, right? So I'm really curious. Jealousy is a funny thing because often I felt I wouldn't, and then suddenly I did. And often I thought I would, and then I didn't. So how do you guys handle jealousy? Let's just start with three people. If there's three people involved, do you all get together and talk about it? Do you process it yourself? Is there any expectation that, oh, you should be past that, or not at all?
Okay, good. So yes to everything you just said.
Okay.
And starting with the fact that it's not even how do we handle it, like whether you're poly, open, swinger, like jealousy happens across any kind of relationship style. And the things that you mentioned, three people getting together to talk about it, processing it on your own, or expecting not to have it, like all of those are, for example, like strategies. And so I want to take us beyond the strategy of what you do to what's underneath, which is like, what is jealousy? And I don't need to get into the psycho-spiritual details of like what a concoction of fear and loss and threat and like, we don't need to define the emotions.
Yeah.
But those emotions are arising. Sometimes a feel of like survival, like I'm gonna fucking die if this person sees this other person again. Like it's really intense. Underneath the emotions even is a need or a value. And so what's happening essentially is you can be a very enlightened lover that wants for your wife or partner. And then all of a sudden you're having this reaction because underneath you're having an unmet need or an unmet value. And so this becomes an opportunity to get to know your deep either limiting beliefs or your deficiencies, as a human being. So when jealousy arises, if the approach is like, oh shit, I shouldn't be feeling that, I should be over that, like you're going to fracture. You're just, you're putting a Band-Aid on it and it's just going to keep bleeding. Right. So when jealousy arises and you go, oh my gosh, now I get to know what's underneath the hood, like who am I really and what's missing in my life, or where's the story of separation, like then you can actually go all the way to the core wound and you go, oh my gosh, I realized that I felt like if I love someone, they're going to hurt me. That's a belief I had when I was 3, and you feel that core wound and you can actually heal that either yourself with one other or the 3 of you sitting down talking about it.
Okay. So you don't have like something, like a system in place to handle these things.
The system is exactly that. There's like almost like a vertical drop out of the story, out of the situation, because it's never really about, the hunky guy that got your wife's phone number. Like it's not really about that. It's about, you.
The hunky girl that got your wife's phone number.
Right. So it can be about the relationship. So this is another key piece, right? So there's me.
Yeah.
I am, well, let's say this is my garden, and I want to keep my garden flourishing and beautiful and trimmed. And then there's a bridge over to my husband's garden. So Michael and I have been together now for 16 years, and he's doing his own self-work constantly, which is beautiful. But there's times when we have to work on that bridge. Like the bridge can get neglected and falling apart. And then all of a sudden, this young, vivacious woman I described to you, like she comes in the picture and I'll be like, well, I'm seeing their bridge is like more tended to than our bridge. And it might not even be my insecurity. It might be like, hey, the bond itself needs some support. So it can be my work, the bridge, or maybe it's his work where he wasn't considerate, like he's got to work some skills, because it takes skills to navigate this, where you're actually communicating and considerate. And so all in all, it's a big construction project.
It's
a gardening job.
Multiple. It's like Manhattan, basically. Bridges, bridges going to different neighborhoods.
Well, but it is important to know, like Manhattan, the more lovers you add, the more complex it gets. And people think, oh, I'm going to go from like monogamy into just being all these lovers. And it's like, actually, I would much rather you see you cultivate one deep, long-term, responsible, communicative relationship. And when that's overflowing, like when you've really mastered that, then add another, if it's enhancing to that, and then add another. So it's like slowing down increases your chances of sustainability.
Yeah, and are you talking just so people not familiar with this? Are you talking about just like sort of fly-by-night lovers, or are you talking about people you're actually in relationship with, like building an emotional, intellectual, spiritual connection bridge with, like you said?
Both. I'm talking about both. Okay, so I happen to be polyamorous, but my husband's a swinger, right? And so for some people, the trigger and the challenge is, oh my God, you had sex with someone else? Like, that's a fucking deal breaker. And for other people like me, I'm like, have sex with everyone you want. You fell in love with someone? Oh no.
Right.
So it's like you said, sometimes you think you're going to be jealous, sometimes you don't. And we don't know what the exact triggers are, but the key is only adding, whether it's a lover or lifetime partner, it's truly going to enhance the previously existing partners.
This is, it's a very complicated wedding. In the old days, it was very complicated, like maybe a Jewish and a Catholic family, very awkward wedding. But a polyamorous and a swinger, like this is
right.
It must have been very awkward at the wedding. The two sides didn't mix, or maybe really did mix, or maybe the swinger side just mixed with itself. It's really interesting. It's like, the more experience I have, and the more I think, and just to be really vulnerable, the more I feel people more deeply. Because I think, in my experience being a young man, you're kind of like just galloping through life. You're building, as a young man, you build your identity, you build your ego structure and your significance, and you separate from your father, and you do your hero's journey, and then you reach midlife around 40, and I think if you're awake, you realize that all that ego structure is pretty fucking meaningless. Like, it's socially important, but it really actually doesn't mean anything. And people call this, midlife crisis. I call it midlife awakening. I mean, you wake up to the fact that it's just fucking social ego structure and it means nothing. And so people do wake up to this. And I find that since around that time, and even more so in more recent years, I feel other people so much more deeply than I used to. It could be testosterone levels, it could be just wisdom, it could be, I don't know what it is, but the idea of having one really great relationship is really time consuming. It's really mind consuming. I think about her. I want her to be happy. I want to support her. Because it's someone I'm in a relationship, she's got a lot to say. She feels deeply. She's highly creative. So it requires a lot of attention. The idea of, and that's one pretty powerful bridge that gets a lot of traffic. Yeah. And the idea for me of having, multiple, like to be in a relationship. I mean, lovers, yeah, sure, easy. Or just, sleeping with people's easy. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about actually having a relationship. You have to quit your job or give your kids away, because I don't have attention span at this point.
Right. So here's my question to you, Adam, because you do a lot of work with parents and you talk about parenting a lot. Like, how many single parents do you know? And James Redfield's one of those authors who, as a very awake author, says every parent should only have one child, right? Like, how many of them do you talk to who have that feeling of like, oh my God, I love this child so much, I can't even imagine there'd be any love left over for another child?
I've heard that said. Yeah. I've heard it said about labradoodles also, though. So now I trust people.
But there's a truth in that, which is that one child is good for some people, and some people, the shape of my heart, like my grandmother, Abuelita Esther, had 16 live births. I have 52 cousins. Like, the shape of her heart is like, she fucking loves a village.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
So, like, that's how some of us are built. And honestly, I don't need to give up my job or my kid. I love so much, so deeply, that truly, like, one person it's not that they're not enough. It's just that it'd be a loss to my capacity to
Understood.
give myself to my partner.
Understood. I need to sleep less. I would just need to sleep a lot less. It's funny. This enoughness is a really good question. And I had a really good analogy. Well, here's the joke version of it, right? I'm trying to remember who the comedian was. I always try to give, I think it was Steve Young, Asian-American comedian. Nope, wasn't him. Sorry, I can't remember the comedian. I always try to give attribution, but it was years ago, and he said, he goes, the thing about making love to one person for forever, he says, you could have lobster and you love lobster. You have lobster every single night. He goes, sooner or later, you're going to want to fuck an Asian chick. That was the joke version.
Right.
The real version is, and this is what I've heard, and you're probably steeped in this, about enoughness is like, yeah, you're absolutely enough. And I totally love you. And you're wonderful. And I absolutely support you. And I feel you. And I also totally love this other person, but in actually a really different way. It just enters me, in a wholly different kind of relationship.
Yeah, Adam, another connection that you and I have is that we did a lot of work with the unique self, right?
Oh yes. Right. I forgot that.
Yeah.
So yes.
In that paradigm, right?
Yes.
What's profound is a spiritual journey to understanding that at core, each of our soul is like a fingerprint.
Yeah,
and
unique fingerprint.
Coming from that place, if we have a sense of who we are, we're like each snowflakes. And a snowflake doesn't say, oh, I want to be the only snowflake.
Right.
It doesn't say like, oh, I see sees the beauty in another and
sure.
Doesn't feel like it detracts. Like,
why would it?
Yeah, we're each absolutely irreplaceable.
Right.
And when we're in our soul, we know that and we shine that. And then we're in that place of like happy for others to make irreplaceable connections that we can't fulfill. It's usually just the ego that goes into the contraction, the fear, the doubt. And that's why I say take the jealousy all the way back to the core wounding.
Yeah.
The core wounding is a crack. It's a crack where the true self starts to believe it's the false self.
Yeah.
Not enough, the broken, the unloved, unwanted. And that's what we're ultimately trying to heal. And I think sometimes this is why I chose this path, is because it's a spiritual path that in loving multiple people, I get to experience more threat to my false self. And it allows me to realize more fully who I am by each person's reflection.
I just heard some Midwestern voice in my head say, well, why can't you love people without having sex with them?
Yeah, you can. There's a lot of polyamorous people who say, hey, it's not about sex. I just fall deeply in love and sex is the great button pusher. I don't need to, trigger everybody's core stuff. And for me, because sex is the great button pusher, like I look at it and I say, sex is our life force energy.
Right.
And it's something that whether I'm circulating that with one person or in my case with 10 people, like that sexual alchemy actually, it's like, it's not a coincidence that when we're orgasming, I mean, we're in the God center of our brain, like that sexual alchemy brings us to our divinity. And to actually control or tap that or pull that back is in a sense trying to limit God.
So take that, Midwestern voice.
Yeah.
No, it's a great, like this idea. There's a beautiful Kabbalistic idea that we're talking about, that everyone is a unique manifestation of the divine, right? Whatever you may believe. But it's true. We're each unique. No one's the same. How interesting is that? None of us are the same. We're all unique manifestations of the universe manifesting itself, whether you're religious or not. That's true. And I guess the only reason people, and it just bugs me so much that people have rage toward you or organize a hate campaign. I mean, who has time for that shit anyway? I mean, there's wines to taste and hot tubs to dip into, and books to read, and people to talk to and enjoy. I mean, it's amazing. I guess the reason that people, feel that kind of rage, obviously, it's threatening their structure of security on earth, like what they think has to be real for them to feel safe.
Yeah, and marriage is looked at, like monogamous marriage is looked at as a fundamental, kind of premise of our society. And to question that, is like, oh, will society even function?
Right. Yeah, it'll be really fun. It might be. No, it's true. Society isn't built on marriage. Church is built on marriage. They want more kids, first of all.
It
Religions want more kids.
is definitely a structure for, being prosperous and going forth and populating the planet.
Multiply, yeah.
But actually, without getting conspiracy theory and blaming the church and going like the reality of how our society evolved, marriage was actually developmentally a very important, and even monogamy, a very important part of our evolution. And I don't want to discredit the fact that
Sure.
by telling people I am now monogamously committed to you, if and we're going to have sex within these confines, it allowed women who are, of course, carrying the baby and taking the financial and physical risk to actually be able to relax, raise a child, survive. If we had a culture that didn't have any kind of commitment, there may be a lot more chaos. And I'm pointing this out because this is kind of pre-conventional.
Sure.
And now that we're in this kind of conventional opportunity to say, hey, marriage isn't the only way.
Right.
There's post-conventional ways of being responsible, ethical, handling, raising children in a way that's, safe, and having multiple lovers and all the sex you want.
Yeah, it's funny. We can have a really long discussion on economics and economic determinism and how society is shaped by economics. I don't want to have that conversation right now, but it's interesting. You got me thinking. Marriage was really important for agriculture.
Yes.
It really came in with agriculture because now there was possession and there was something to protect and something to pass down. And then you had kind of the Industrial Revolution, which is certainly not supportive of marriage, but it kind of worked because it kept the society going. Now we're kind of in economic chaos. There's I don't know what's going to happen. I don't think anyone really knows. Once work is transferred to sex bots, love bots, once work is actually sent to robots and everything's automated, there's not much work to do left. People actually may discover that the bonds that kept the economic engine going for so many years may not be that important. I don't know if economics wants people to stay together. Corporations want people to move all over the place, right? Splits families. Jobs are strange these days. I mean, so much is happening that stability, I guess what I'm saying is like stability was, really marriage served stable society, but we're not in a stable society anymore. The norm isn't stable.
Which is all the more reason for people to be threatened by marriage falling apart. It's like, this is like, oh no, I need my beaver cleaver. Like that creates the illusion of stability. But I will say this, because I'm not an economic expert or poli-sci major, but I can tell you when I vision the future of love, which is something that I do a lot. When I'm lying in bed and my heart is open and I'm between lovers, I really ask myself, I'm like, what would it look like if at the deep personal level we could let go of like ownership and possessiveness, and we could actually allow people to be sovereign, allow them to follow their heart, allow them to be in their pleasure and want for them. And I believe very, very strongly that the skills of communication and what we call compersion, which is wanting for another's pleasure, are the same skills that make for a more enlightened society, where we look at a post-capitalistic, more abundant future where people aren't trying to hoard in order to, to save and possess, and instead there's a generosity. And it doesn't just happen economically, it happens at the level of the heart, and it happens in the interpersonal relationships. And I don't actually envision a world, when we kind of visualize world peace, where, the world's at peace, but yet there's still war happening between monogamy and polyamory and swinging. It's like, no, we actually have to accept people have different hearts and they need to follow their different paths.
Some people like Chinese food, some people like Indian food, some people like hamburgers and fries. I mean, what's the complication here, really? Anyway, beautiful. Hey, Kamala, Devi, thank you, first of all, for hanging out.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
I know you have a book coming out in November, and I'd probably love to have you back. Can you talk about it?
Happy to say I've got Secret Lives of Sex Shamans, and it's actually an anthology with intimate true stories of about 20 different sexual healers and shamans and practitioners. And it's the International School of Temple Arts. So I'm a lead faculty for this mystery school, and we're just compiling our stories and kind of coming out to the world about it.
It's funny, my son said at some point, he said, when you were young, Dad, everyone had their own tennis coach. Now everyone has their own shaman. Like, what happened? When you say sexual shaman, what does that mean?
So shamanism is a deep knowing of the invisible world. So obviously we are operating in three-dimensional material reality, but a shaman also has access to the energy realm and can actually influence, heal, transform the physical based on this access. And that access in a sexual shaman is through ecstasy, through pleasure, through this like raising of vibration and getting in touch with the kundalini and the life force, and then being able to transform reality with that energy.
So my understanding of shamanism is, to be able to cross between worlds, sort of to kind of move from an energetic world into the physical common world that we live in. So folks, if you're interested in that, you definitely want to be interested in Kamala's work. How can people learn more about you? And you mentioned ISTA, which is the International Society for Tantric Awareness?
It's International School of Temple Arts.
Temple Arts.
And you can reach me through kamaladevi.com.
Only send nice letters.
That's right. I actually would love to give you a free guide on polyamory, as well as some tantra terms that I put together. So I've got some fun free gifts on kamaladevi.com.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and then also get on my list so that I can tell you more about the book, which is coming in. I have 2 books coming, so I want 2 more interviews with you, Adam.
You got it. Well, the sexual shamanism, tales of sexual shamans, sounds like perfect bedtime reading for my next set of kids. So that's good. What's the other book?
It's 52 Fridays with My Bitch. So
that sounds like every marriage diary. I don't know. What's
right. Well, it was kind of a spoof off the 50 Shades of Grey, but it's my lesbian lover and I have this Friday standing date where we do a lot of kinky play, and we kind of made this this fantasy novel out of our true story. So
50 Shades of Bitch. Wow. Definitely sounds like a relationship I had. But yeah, that'll be interesting. So that follows you over the course of a year kind of thing?
Exactly. It's every Friday there's another erotic, fantasy.
Who wouldn't want to read that? I'll wait for the movie. But hey, Kamala Devi, thank you so much. And it's kamaladevi.com, KamalaDevi.com. Thanks so much for being here. All right. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.